My name is Tessa, and the truth is, I never thought I would end up in a situation where I was forced to choose between my family and my independence. But there I was, standing in my childhood home, my heart racing as my dad confronted me over a decision that seemed to spiral out of control. I had just landed a promotion at work that came with a generous bonus, something I had worked tirelessly for. It felt like a dream come true, but what happened next shattered that dream in an instant. "Why can't you just share a little, people?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with expectation. I could feel the tension building, a wave of frustration crashing over me. I had always been the dutiful daughter, the one who followed the rules and sought to please everyone around me. But that day, I realized that pleasing my dad would mean sacrificing my own hard-earned success. Looking back, it's almost surreal how quickly everything unraveled. It was a Sunday afternoon, a day that should have been filled with warmth and family, but instead, it morphed into a battleground. I had invited him over to celebrate my achievement, but I never anticipated it would turn into a confrontation over money. I remember the way the sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air, as if mocking the chaos that was about to ensue. "Is it really that hard to help your family out?" he continued, his voice rising. I wanted to scream, to tell him that I had already given so much of myself, my time, my energy, my dreams. But instead, I stood there, frozen. In that moment, I felt a mix of guilt and anger swelling within me. It was as if my entire life had been leading up to this confrontation, and I suddenly realized that this wasn't just about money, it was about respect. My dad didn't see my promotion as a result of my hard work. He saw it as an opportunity to fill his own pockets. My mind drifted back to all those nights I spent studying late, fueled by coffee and ambition. The countless sacrifices I had made to prove myself in a world that often undervalued women. The thought of sharing my bonus felt like a betrayal to everything I had fought for. It wasn't just about the money. It was about finally claiming my place in the world, about standing up for myself in a way I never had before. "Do you really think I owe you this?" I finally found my voice, and it was stronger than I had anticipated. "I worked hard for this bonus. I earned it." I could see the surprise flash across his face, a mix of anger and confusion. It was a moment I had imagined in my head countless times, but nothing could prepare me for how it felt to actually say those words out loud. But rather than a breakthrough, my words only seemed to fuel the fire. "You're being selfish, Tessa." "You've always been selfish," he shot back, his tone cutting deep. The accusation stung, but I realized it wasn't just about me. It was about his expectations, his dreams for me that I had never fully embraced. I was supposed to be the supportive daughter who contributed to the family pot, no questions asked. In that moment, I felt a shift in my perspective. This wasn't just an argument about money. It was about my own autonomy, about reclaiming my life from the expectations that had suffocated me for so long. "What would you have done in my place? Let me know below." As the argument escalated, my dad's words became more accusatory, and I could feel the walls closing in around me. I was trapped in a cycle of guilt and anger that I had long tried to escape. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. I would no longer allow my worth to be dictated by anyone else, not even my father. I left the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed space, air to breathe, and clarity to think. The world outside was bright and inviting, and I stepped onto the porch, the cool breeze wrapping around me like a comforting hug. It felt good to be away from the accusations and the noise, but I also knew that the confrontation wasn't over. My dad followed me outside, his face flushed with anger. "You can't just walk away from this," he shouted, but I could feel a new sense of resolve taking root inside me. I didn't have to accept his definition of family, of success, or of obligation. I could carve out my own path. The week that followed was a whirlwind. I spent late nights contemplating my next steps, grappling with feelings of guilt, while simultaneously feeling a sense of liberation. I found myself looking at my house with new eyes, evaluating everything it represented. It was more than just a home. It was a symbol of my independence, my achievements, and my right to make choices that aligned with my values. As the days passed, I realized I could take control of my life in ways I had never imagined. Selling the house felt like a radical idea at first, but the more I considered it, the more it made sense. I could finally sever the ties that bound me to expectations that were not my own. It was a drastic move, but I was done living for someone else. I was ready to take that leap, to forge my own path, and to claim my identity outside of my family's shadow. And so, I made my plan. I started reaching out to real estate agents, gathering information, and preparing to sell the home I had grown up in. It felt exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I knew it would create waves, but deep down, I was ready for the storm. After all, sometimes you have to break free from the past to step into your future. I spent hours researching the housing market, poring over statistics and trends, trying to figure out the best time to sell. I felt like I was on a roller coaster ride, full of ups and downs, each twist and turn shaking me to my core. My heart raced with each decision, my mind buzzing with the possibilities of what could come next. The more I learned, the more confident I became. I was ready to take charge of my own narrative. I found a local real estate agent who was enthusiastic and knowledgeable. We met for coffee and I shared my story. I told her how I had come to this point, how I felt suffocated by the weight of my father's expectations. She nodded, understanding the emotional burden that often accompanies such decisions. It was refreshing to talk to someone who wasn't just focused on numbers, but also understood the significance of my journey. We talked strategy and timing, and I felt a rush of excitement as we began to lay out a plan. We agreed to list the house at a competitive price to attract buyers quickly. I spent the next few days decluttering, cleaning, and staging my home. I wanted to present it in the best light possible, and I felt a sense of pride as I transformed my space into something inviting. Every box I packed, every picture I took down, felt like another layer of my past being peeled away. The day we listed the house was surreal. I remember standing in the living room, looking at the walls that had witnessed so much of my life, the birthday parties, the holidays, the arguments, and the laughter. I took a deep breath, knowing that this was the last time I would experience those memories in that way. I was ready to say goodbye. Then came the offers. They rolled in faster than I expected. Each one brought me a mix of hope and anxiety. I was suddenly faced with a barrage of choices. I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, and each offer represented a different path for my future. There was a young couple that seemed so eager to make the place their own, and an investor looking to flip the house for profit. I considered each offer carefully, weighing not just the financial aspect, but also what each buyer represented. After a few days of deliberation, I decided to go with the couple. They reminded me of myself, young and hopeful, ready to build their dreams. It felt right to pass the torch to someone who would appreciate the home as much as I had. The day I accepted their offer, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I could feel the excitement building, knowing I was one step closer to reclaiming my life. As the closing date approached, I found myself oscillating between exhilaration and fear. What would my life look like without this house? Would I regret my decision? But then I remembered the feeling of liberation that had sparked this journey. I envisioned the new opportunities ahead, the freedom to explore who I was without the constraints of my past. Then, on closing day, I sat at the table with my agent and the buyers. I signed my name over and over again, each stroke of the pen sealing my commitment to change. When the last document was signed, I felt a rush of emotions flood over me: joy, relief, and yes, a tinge of sadness. But more than anything, I felt empowered. I left the closing meeting with a check in my hand and a sense of finality. It felt surreal, like I had just stepped off a tightrope after a daring act. I was free. I took a moment to sit in my car, letting it sink in. I could finally breathe without the weight of expectations pressing down on me. I felt like I had shed a skin that had long outlived its purpose. In the weeks that followed, I took some time for myself. I explored new neighborhoods, visited local cafes, and even tried my hand at hobbies I'd never pursued before. I joined a pottery class and discovered a knack for creating beautiful pieces. I went hiking on weekends, finding solace in nature. I even started journaling again, capturing my thoughts and feelings as I navigated this new chapter of my life. As much as I was enjoying my newfound freedom, I also faced challenges. There were moments of loneliness, and I had to confront feelings of guilt. I wondered if my father would ever understand my decision, or if he would remain hurt by my choice to sell the family home. I grappled with these thoughts, but then I reminded myself that I had to prioritize my own happiness for the first time in my life. One evening, I was sitting in my tiny apartment, surrounded by boxers yet to be unpacked, when I received a text from my dad. It was a simple message asking how I was doing. My heart raced as I stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. Should I share my joy, or should I hold back? But then I thought about everything I had been through and how far I had come. I decided to be honest, to share my excitement about my new life and the adventures I was embarking on. I told him that I was doing well, that I was finding my footing, and that I was finally starting to feel like myself again. I hit send and waited. A part of me was terrified of his response, but another part was determined to stand my ground. When my phone buzzed moments later, my heart skipped a beat. His reply was short, but filled with a sense of curiosity. He asked about my new place and how I was adapting. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was a turning point, a chance to bridge the gap that had formed between us. As I navigated my new life, I realized that change isn't just about letting go of the past. It's also about embracing what comes next. I was ready for whatever lay ahead, unafraid of the uncertainty. I had taken the first steps toward my own journey, and I was finally ready to write my own story. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight poured through my window, illuminating the small but cozy space I now called home. The walls were still bare, but I had a vision for how I wanted to decorate them. I imagined photographs from my travels, vibrant artwork that resonated with my soul, and little mementos from the adventures I had yet to take. It felt invigorating to think that I had the freedom to create my own environment, one that truly reflected who I was becoming. After a quick breakfast, I decided to take a stroll around my new neighborhood. I had spent so much time in my childhood home that I had forgotten how refreshing it could be to explore a new area. As I walked, I noticed the little things, the aroma of freshly baked goods wafting from a nearby bakery, the sound of children laughing as they played in a park, and the colorful flower beds lining the streets. Each step I took felt like a small victory, a testament to my resilience. I found myself wandering into a local coffee shop that had a warm, inviting atmosphere. The barista greeted me with a smile, and the moment I tasted my cappuccino, I was reminded of how much I had missed the simple pleasures in life. Sitting at a small table, I pulled out my laptop and began to brainstorm ideas for the next chapter of my life. Maybe I could start a blog to document my journey, share my experiences, and connect with others who were navigating their own challenges. It felt like a way to turn my struggles into something meaningful, to create a community around shared stories and growth. While I typed away, I received a text from my dad. He was asking if I wanted to have lunch with him. My heart raced at the thought. Could this be the beginning of a mended relationship? After everything that had happened, I was hesitant, but part of me craved that connection. I replied with a cautious sure, and we set a time and place. When I arrived at the restaurant, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I spotted him seated at a corner table, looking somewhat out of place. He was always more at home in the kitchen than in a public restaurant. As I approached, I noticed the lines on his face seemed deeper, the weight of our estrangement visible in his posture. "Hey, kiddo," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey, Dad." I slid into the seat across from him, my heart pounding. We exchanged pleasantries, discussing the weather and how the restaurant had changed since I last visited. The conversation felt stiff, as if there were an invisible barrier between us, one that had been built over years of misunderstandings and unspoken words. I took a deep breath and decided to take a leap. Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about the house and everything. He stiffened, eyes narrowing slightly. I didn't want to bring it up. I don't understand why you wouldn't want to share your bonus. It was such a big deal. I felt the familiar surge of frustration, but held my ground. It wasn't just about the money, Dad. It was about respect. I felt like I finally earned something on my own. And it hurt to feel like it was expected of me to share it without any acknowledgement of what I had been through. He looked away, fidgeting with the napkin on the table. I just wanted to help you. I thought sharing would ease your burden. By kicking me out, I shot back, unable to suppress the hurt in my voice. He looked taken aback, and for a moment, silence enveloped us. My heart raced as I waited for his response. I didn't know how else to motivate you. I thought you needed a push. I shook my head, feeling a mixture of sadness and anger. That's not how love works, Dad. Motivating someone by pushing them away only leads to resentment. The weight of my words hung in the air, and I could see the realization dawning on him. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were having a real conversation, one that peeled back the layers of our relationship. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I thought I was doing what was best for you. I know you did, but I needed to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. I needed you to trust me. His gaze softened, and I could see the conflict within him. I guess I've always been afraid. Afraid that if I let go, you'd fall. Dad, I'm not a child anymore. I'm learning to fly. As lunch went on, we began to share stories, memories of our happier times. I found myself laughing at the ridiculous things we had done together. The spontaneous road trips and the late-night kitchen dance parties. It felt good to reminisce, to remember the bond that had once been so strong. By the time we finished our meals, I felt a sense of hope blossoming. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a step in the right direction. As we left the restaurant, I could see a glimmer of understanding in his eyes, a willingness to try to rebuild what had been lost. After parting ways, I reflected on our conversation. It was clear to me that my relationship with my dad was a work in progress, just like everything else in my life. I had taken a big step toward healing, not just for myself, but for him as well. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. I was ready to embrace my new life fully. There were still challenges ahead, but I was determined to meet them head-on. I was carving out my path, one day at a time, and no one could take that away from me. As I stepped into my apartment, the familiar scent of lavender and fresh linen wrapped around me like a warm hug. It was my sanctuary, a space I had intentionally decorated to reflect my personality, soft, inviting, and full of little reminders of the dreams I was chasing. I'd spent countless hours arranging the furniture just right, hanging artwork that inspired me, and placing plants in every nook I could find. This was my haven, and I felt a sense of pride in creating a home that was entirely my own. The next morning, the sun streamed through my window, casting a golden glow on the walls. I brewed my favorite coffee and sat at my little dining table where I could watch the world outside. I made it a habit to start each day with gratitude. I would jot down 3 things I was thankful for in my journal, a practice that had shifted my perspective since I'd moved out. But that morning, as I sipped my coffee, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was still on shaky ground with my dad. Despite our heart-to-heart the night before, I was still grappling with the weight of what had happened. The truth was, I had never imagined that my dad would react so strongly to my bonus. I had thought he would be proud of me, that he'd celebrate my success, rather than use it as a reason to push me away. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to ground myself in the present and let go of the anger that kept creeping back in. As the days went by, I focused on what I could control. I threw myself into work, diving deep into projects that challenged me and pushed my creative boundaries. I became known for my innovative ideas, earning respect from my colleagues and building a reputation that made me feel more confident in my abilities. I poured my energy into my job, and in many ways it became a refuge. But there were moments when I would catch myself daydreaming about the house. It was a bittersweet thought. Selling the house felt like a betrayal at times, but it was also liberating. I had poured so much of my heart into it, but I also realized it was a constant reminder of my past, a symbol of my strained relationship with my father. I knew the decision to sell was a necessary step toward moving forward, but it didn't make it any easier. I spent evenings scrolling through real estate websites, looking at potential listings, and imagining what my next home could look like. One evening, I stumbled upon a charming little bungalow nestled in a quiet neighborhood. It had character, a small garden, and a cozy porch where I could envision myself sipping coffee in the mornings. I felt a stirring in my heart, a flicker of excitement. That feeling reminded me of why I had loved my home so much before everything fell apart. It represented a fresh start, and I was ready for that. I decided to call the real estate agent to arrange a viewing. The moment I stepped into the bungalow, I felt a connection, a sense of peace washed over me. The natural light poured in, illuminating the space and making it feel warm and welcoming. I could already picture myself here, creating new memories, building new traditions. It was a blank canvas, and I was ready to paint my life anew. As the weeks went by, I took the steps necessary to sell my house. I met with appraisers, sorted through my belongings, and began packing up the memories I had created there. Each box I filled was like letting go of a piece of my past, but I felt a sense of relief with every item that left my home. It was cathartic. I even stumbled upon old photographs of my dad and me, memories of happier times that made me smile despite the pain. I placed those photos aside, telling myself that I could always revisit those memories. But for now, I needed to focus on the present. The day I received the offer on my house felt surreal. I stared at the email, my heart racing. It was a good offer, one that would set me up for the next chapter of my life. I signed the papers with trembling hands, feeling both exhilarated and terrified. This was it. I was officially moving on. Yet, there was still a part of me that hesitated. I wanted to share this moment with my dad, to show him how much I was growing and changing, but I also knew that our relationship was still too fragile to risk. As I prepared for the closing, I found myself reflecting on what I wanted to say to my dad. I wanted to invite him to see my new place, to show him the life I was building for myself, but I was unsure if I should reach out now or wait until everything was settled. I decided to take a step back, to give both of us the space we needed to grow individually before attempting to reconnect. The closing day arrived, and I found myself sitting at the table with my agent. A sense of finality washing over me as I signed the last document. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer tied to a home that represented heartache. I was free to embrace a future I could shape on my own terms. The little bungalow was still on my mind, and I hoped it would be mine soon. I left the closing with a mix of relief and anticipation, my heart racing at the thought of what was to come. I took a deep breath, stepping out into the bright sunlight, feeling as if I had just crossed a threshold into a new life. With every step I took back to my apartment, I felt lighter, ready to embrace what lay ahead, but still carrying the bittersweet memories of my past. I knew I had so much more to discover about myself, and I was finally ready to explore it all. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. I had sold the house, but the echoes of my past lingered like shadows. I found myself revisiting old haunts, places that held both joy and pain, as I tried to navigate this newfound freedom. I spent a lot of time at coffee shops, observing people as they went about their lives, feeling oddly disconnected from them, yet oddly comforted by their mundane routines. I often wondered if they, too, had stories that could rival my own, stories of triumph and heartache that shaped who they were. On one particularly crisp morning, I decided to visit a nearby park, a place I had often gone to think and escape the chaos of my life. I settled on a bench, watching the leaves fall like whispers from the trees, each one a reminder of change. It was peaceful, yet I felt a familiar tug of anxiety in my chest. What now? What was I going to do with myself? I had my bonus, yes, but it felt so insignificant compared to the emotional turmoil I had just emerged from. With my thoughts swirling, I took out my phone and opened my notes app. I had started jotting down ideas for a new chapter in my life, a way to channel my feelings into something productive. I wrote about starting a business, maybe a small boutique or a creative studio. After all, I had always dreamed of being an entrepreneur, but life had always pushed me down a different path. Now, with the house sold and a little money in my pocket, the idea felt more tangible than ever. But then, my mind wandered back to my dad. Even after the dust had settled, the anger I felt toward him was still fresh. I didn't understand how he could be so narrow-minded, so fixated on money, that he couldn't see the bigger picture of our relationship. I had always thought he would support me, especially after everything that had happened. Instead, he had chosen to kick me out. It was a bitter pill to swallow. As I sat there, I remembered the countless conversations we'd had about finances, his emphasis on saving and investing, and how he believed that money was the key to happiness. I had wanted to show him that there was more to life than just wealth. I wanted him to see that I was capable of success on my own terms, not just through the lens of how much money I could bring to the table. But instead, I felt as though he had turned his back on me, and it stung deeper than I wanted to admit. After a couple of hours at the park, I decided it was time to head home. I wanted to dive deeper into my plans. I poured a cup of tea when I got back and sat down at my kitchen table. The sunlight spilling through the window, illuminating my little space. I began sketching out ideas for my potential business. I envisioned a cozy environment filled with local art, handmade goods, and a community vibe, a place where people could gather, share stories, and create connection. It was more than just a dream, it was a lifeline. As I brainstormed, I felt a flicker of excitement. This was my chance to reclaim my narrative, to show myself and, maybe even my dad, that I was more than just his daughter. I was my own person, capable and strong. I started researching everything I could about running a business, from finances to marketing strategies. I was ready to get my hands dirty and make it happen. Days turned into weeks, and I immersed myself in this new project. I attended workshops, met with other aspiring entrepreneurs, and slowly began to carve out a place for myself in this unfamiliar world. The more I learned, the more empowered I felt. I was no longer just a girl who had been kicked out. I was a woman on a mission. But then came the inevitable moment when I had to face the reality of my relationship with my father. After some time, I decided to reach out to him. I was apprehensive, unsure of how he would react. Would he even want to hear from me after everything? Would he be willing to listen? I sent him a text, simple and straightforward. "Hey Dad, can we talk? I'd like to share what I've been working on." My heart raced as I pressed send. It felt like stepping off a cliff, not knowing if there would be a net to catch me. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. "Sure, let's meet up this weekend." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. The thought of seeing him again brought a mix of emotions flooding back. But I knew I had to do this. I had to stand my ground and share my vision, not just for the business, but for our relationship. As the weekend approached, I prepared myself mentally. I thought about what I wanted to say, how I wanted to express my feelings. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't just seeking his approval. I wanted him to see me as I was an adult, making my own choices. When the day finally came, I met him at a cafe, the same place we used to visit when I was younger. The familiar surroundings felt both comforting and daunting. As I waited for him to arrive, I replayed the last time we were together in my mind. The harsh words exchanged, the pain of rejection. I hoped this meeting would be different. When he walked in, I felt a rush of emotions, nostalgia, anger, love, fear. He looked older, more worn than I remembered, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy. We sat across from each other, the tension thick in the air. I took a deep breath, ready to share my journey, ready to reclaim my story. I began to speak, my voice trembling slightly as I fought to keep my emotions in check. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation. I know it was intense, and I understand why you felt the way you did. But I need you to see things from my perspective. I watched his expression shift, a mix of defensiveness and curiosity. It was a tightrope walk, trying to navigate the minefield of our relationship. I've been working hard for this bonus. It wasn't just handed to me. I fought for it. Late nights, early mornings, every ounce of effort was for this moment. I thought it would be a chance to invest in something that could grow, not just for me, but for our family. I wanted us to be on the same page, to build something together. I didn't realize how deeply my decision would affect you. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed tightly over his chest. You have to understand, I come from a different place. When I was your age, things were tough. We didn't have the luxury of choices. I'm just trying to protect you. I appreciate that, Dad. I really do, I replied, trying to keep my tone calm and collected. But I'm not you. I'm not living in the past. I have different opportunities and different dreams. I need you to trust me to pursue them. I could see the conflict on his face, the battle between wanting to support me and holding on to his old beliefs. The conversation spiraled into memories, stories, and feelings that we had both buried. I spoke about my ambitions, the plans I had for the business, and how I envisioned using my bonus to elevate not just my life, but to contribute to the family in a meaningful way. As I shared my dreams, I could see a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but it quickly faded. I just don't want you to throw it all away, he finally said, his voice softer now. What if things don't work out? What if you end up like me, struggling to make ends meet? Dad, I can't think that way. I have to take risks. We can't live our lives in fear of what might happen. I'm ready to face whatever comes my way. This is my chance to make something of myself. I felt a swell of determination with every word I spoke. The conversation eventually shifted to silence, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken words. I watched as he stared into his coffee cup, lost in thought. I wanted to reach across the table, to reassure him that everything would be okay, that I would make him proud. But the moment passed, and the tension returned. It was clear we were still miles apart in our understanding. I wrapped up the meeting, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I had planted a seed of doubt in his mind about the way he viewed my choices. After that day, I felt lighter. I had spoken my truth, and regardless of the outcome, I had taken a step toward asserting my independence. But the relief was short-lived. As I returned home, I could still hear the echoes of his concerns in my mind. The fear, the worry, it seeped into my thoughts like a stubborn stain. Days turned into a week, and I was restless. I replayed our conversation over and over, unsure if I had made any impact at all. As I sat in my living room, the weight of the house began to feel like a burden. It was a reminder of the rift between my dad and me, of the expectations he had for me that I wasn't living up to. One evening, while scrolling through listings on my phone, I stumbled upon an intriguing opportunity, a property that looked perfect for my vision. It was a little fixer-upper that could be transformed into a workspace for my business, a place where I could finally bring my ideas to life. I felt a spark of excitement, but the nagging voice of doubt crept in. My heart raced as I considered my options. What if I sold the house? What if I took the plunge and used that money for my dreams? I knew it would be a drastic move, and I could already hear my dad's voice warning me about making impulsive decisions. But then again, hadn't I already made the most impulsive decision of my life by staying silent for too long? That night, I made a list of pros and cons. I couldn't shake the feeling that selling my house might be the key to breaking free from my dad's shadow. It was a gamble, but sometimes you had to risk it all to gain something greater. The next day, I called a real estate agent. The conversation was surreal. I felt a mix of excitement and fear as I explained my situation and my intentions. She was enthusiastic, and her energy fueled my own. It felt liberating to finally take control of my life, to own my choices fully. I could see a future where I wasn't just living under the weight of expectations, but thriving in my own space, carving out my identity. As I prepared for the house to go on the market, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. I was finally doing something for myself. I started packing up old memories, sorting through years of belongings that had accumulated in the corners of the rooms. Each item I touched brought back stories, moments of laughter and tears, but I was ready to let go. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I was not just selling a house, I was selling the fear that had kept me stagnant for so long. I was ready to move forward, to embrace the unknown, and to create a life that was truly mine. As the days rolled on, the house started to look emptier. I could hear the echoes of my past reverberating through the walls. But I was determined to fill that silence with new experiences. Each box I packed felt like a step toward liberation. I found items I had completely forgotten about, an old guitar collecting dust in the corner, a scrapbook filled with faded photographs of friends, long lost to time, and the quirky little trinkets I had picked up from places I had traveled to. It was a bittersweet process, yet there was a thrill that came with letting go. I remember standing in the living room one afternoon, surrounded by boxers and packing tape, when I stumbled upon a picture frame. Inside was a photo of me at my college graduation, beaming with pride, surrounded by friends who were like family. That moment felt like a lifetime ago, a stark reminder of who I was before I let fear dictate my choices. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass, and for the first time in years, I saw not just nostalgia, but potential. I was reclaiming that girl, the ambitious, hopeful woman who dared to dream. By the time the house was officially listed, I was both exhilarated and terrified. The agent had suggested some renovations to make the place more appealing to buyers, and I dove into them with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. I painted walls in fresh colors, filled spaces with light, and transformed my home into a canvas of possibility. Each brushstroke felt like an act of defiance against the past I was so eager to escape. I was tired of living in a place that represented everything I didn't want anymore. I wanted my life to be vibrant, not just in color, but in every aspect. As I worked, I started to imagine what my new life would look like. I envisioned a quaint little house filled with laughter, where I could host brunches with friends, share stories over coffee, and have intimate book club meetings that spilled into the evening with wine and laughter. I could see myself diving into hobbies that I had pushed aside for far too long, like painting or even learning the guitar. But as I dreamt about the future, I also felt a pang of guilt. Was I being selfish for wanting more? Was it wrong to chase after something that felt so elusive? Those thoughts swirled in my head as I met with potential buyers during the open house. I watched them stroll through the rooms that held so much of my history. They marveled at the cozy nooks and the well-kept garden, and I couldn't help but feel a tug at my heart. What if they didn't appreciate the soul of this place? What if they saw it merely as a transaction? I wanted them to understand the laughter that had echoed through the halls, the tears shed in the quiet of the night, and the memories that had shaped who I was. After a particularly long day of showings, I found myself sitting on the porch steps, feeling the cool evening breeze on my face. I closed my eyes, allowing the sounds of nature to envelop me. I thought about how far I had come. It wasn't just about selling a house, it was about stepping into a future that felt authentic to me. But was I truly ready to let go? What would I do if I sold this house and didn't know where to go next? I realized I had to shift my perspective. Instead of seeing the house as an anchor, I began to view it as a vessel that had carried me through a significant chapter of my life. I had outgrown it, and it was time to set sail toward uncharted waters. But even as I embraced that notion, I couldn't shake the lingering question: what if I failed in my next adventure? What if I ended up regretting this decision? To quell the uncertainty, I turned to my friends. They were my sounding board, my cheerleaders in this transformative phase. I poured my heart out over dinner one night, sharing my fears and dreams. They listened intently, offering encouragement and stories of their own journeys. It felt comforting to know that I wasn't alone in my struggles, that everyone had their own battles and triumphs. One of my friends asked me, "What does your ideal future look like? What makes your heart race with excitement?" That question hung in the air, and I realized I hadn't truly defined my vision. Sure, I had the basics in mind: a new house, a fresh start, but what did I want beyond that? I wanted to feel alive, to be surrounded by creativity and joy. I wanted to travel, explore new cultures, and maybe even find love again. The conversation lit a fire in me, and I felt invigorated. As the days passed, the offers for my house started rolling in, some promising, others disappointing. Each time I reviewed an offer, my heart raced. I learned that selling a home was as much an emotional journey as it was a financial transaction. And as I weighed my options, I couldn't help but wonder, was there a point where I should just take the leap without looking back? The night before I was set to make my final decision, I lay awake, my mind racing. I pulled out my journal, scribbling my thoughts, fears, and hopes. I wrote about the life I wanted to create, the people I wanted to surround myself with, and the adventures I longed to embark on. By the time I finished, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. The next morning, I made my choice. I was ready to move forward, not just physically but emotionally. I was ready to take the plunge into the unknown. As I signed the papers, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I took a deep breath, realizing that this was more than just a transaction. It was a declaration of my independence. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment when you had to choose between comfort and the unknown? Let me know below. I remember the moment so vividly, the sun streaming through the window as I signed my name on the dotted line, the sound of the pen scratching against the paper echoing in my mind. It felt like a powerful affirmation, almost like a promise to myself that I was ready to embrace whatever came next. My heart raced as I handed the documents back to the realtor, a huge weight lifting from my chest. I had done it. I was free from the constraints of my father's expectations and the bitterness that had clouded our relationship. In the days that followed, I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. Selling the house meant closing a chapter of my life, one that was fraught with tension and disappointment. But it also meant opening a new one filled with possibilities. I started to picture my future, and it was vibrant and alive. I imagined a cozy apartment filled with plants, colorful art, and laughter. I envisioned weekends spent exploring new neighborhoods, meeting new friends, and rediscovering myself. I knew I needed to put some distance between myself and my father. I realized that the years of emotional turmoil and manipulation had taken a toll on my spirit. It wasn't just about the house, it was about reclaiming my life. I spent hours browsing rental listings, but deep down, I knew I wanted to create a space that truly felt like home. As the closing date approached, I began to pack up the remnants of my life in that house. Each box I filled was a reminder of the moments I had lived there, the laughter, the tears, the dreams that had either blossomed or withered away. I stumbled across old photographs, each one telling a story I had almost forgotten. I smiled at the memories of birthday parties, family gatherings, and the simpler times before the strain had seeped into our lives. Yet, the more I packed, the more I felt a sense of liberation. I was shedding my old skin, ready to step into the woman I wanted to become. The day of the closing arrived, and I walked into the empty house one last time. I took a deep breath, absorbing the remnants of my past. I walked through each room, recalling the moments that had once filled those spaces. I couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of hope. I was ready to say goodbye, not just to the house, but to the version of myself that had felt trapped within its walls. After the closing, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. I had sold the house, but it felt more like I had sold my past that no longer defined me. With the check in hand, I felt a sense of freedom that was almost intoxicating. I had the means to create a new beginning, and I was determined to make it count. I started to explore my options for a new place to live. I visited a few apartments that were charming and filled with character. The first one was a small studio in a bustling neighborhood with a vibrant arts scene. The walls were painted a soft blue, and the large windows let in the warm afternoon sun. It felt alive, much like how I wanted my life to be. I could already envision myself hosting friends for dinner, creating a cozy nook filled with books, and painting in the evening. Then, there was a 2-bedroom loft that had this incredible exposed brick wall and a kitchen that made my heart skip a beat. It was larger than I had anticipated, but the price was right, and the location was perfect. I imagined having a roommate, sharing laughter and late-night snacks, and building a life filled with connection. But there was also a part of me that hesitated. Did I really want to share my space? After spending so many years feeling suffocated by family dynamics, the idea of living with someone again felt daunting. I took my time with the decision. I wanted to be sure that my next move was intentional. I didn't want to rush into anything out of fear or loneliness. I began to write down what I truly wanted, something I hadn't done in a while. I wanted a place that was not just a roof over my head, but a sanctuary for my spirit. I wanted a space that would foster my creativity and allow me to grow. I wanted to feel safe and at peace. As I pondered my options, I started to look beyond just the physical space. I thought about the community I wanted to build around me. I wanted to connect with people who shared my interests, my passions, and my dreams. I wanted to find a place where I could thrive, not just survive. I began to reach out to friends and explore local events, looking for opportunities to engage with others. I signed up for a painting class, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. I joined a book club and found myself engrossed in discussions about stories that inspired me. Each new experience felt like a stepping stone toward the life I yearned for, one filled with creativity, connection, and joy. I realized that the freedom I had gained from selling the house was not just about the money or the physical space. It was about the choices I now had. I could choose who I wanted to be and what I wanted to create. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. I was ready to embrace the unknown and let go of the past that had held me captive for far too long. I felt empowered, like I could shape my destiny in a way that felt authentic to who I was. In that moment, I truly understood that moving on wasn't just about finding a new place to live. It was about transforming my entire life. I was ready for the adventure ahead, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. As the days passed, I began to settle into this newfound freedom. Every morning, I would wake up and feel the sunlight streaming through my window, warming my skin like a gentle hug. It reminded me that I was alive, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. I started keeping a journal, jotting down my thoughts and emotions, reflecting on the changes taking place within me. Writing became my sanctuary, a place where I could unravel my feelings without judgment. I found joy in the little things, cooking a new recipe, spending hours wandering through local thrift shops, and discovering hidden gems in the city. One afternoon, I stumbled upon a quaint little cafe tucked away in a corner of the neighborhood. Its walls were adorned with local artwork, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee was intoxicating. I ordered a cappuccino, settled into a corner, and watched the world go by. It was in that moment that I realized how often I had rushed through life, missing the beauty that existed all around me. I started to connect with people in ways I hadn't before. I met a woman in my painting class named Lisa. She was vibrant, full of life, and had a contagious laugh that echoed through the studio. We clicked immediately, bonding over our shared love for creativity and our desire to escape the constraints of our pasts. One day, while we were mixing colors, she said something that struck a chord with me. You know, sometimes it takes losing everything to find out what you really want. Those words lingered in my mind long after that day. It was true. I had felt like I'd lost everything when my dad kicked me out, but in reality, I was gaining so much more. I was rediscovering myself, peeling back the layers of who I thought I was, and uncovering the person I was meant to be. As the weeks rolled on, I began exploring my artistic side more deeply. I enrolled in a weekend workshop focused on abstract painting. The instructor encouraged us to let go of our inhibitions and express our emotions on canvas. I remember standing in front of that blank canvas, brush in hand, heart racing as I tried to channel everything I had been feeling, the hurt, the anger, the liberation, with every stroke. I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The colors danced together, creating a chaotic yet beautiful representation of my journey. I decided to host an art show to showcase my work and the work of my classmates. The planning was exhilarating. I had never taken the lead on something like this before. I reached out to local businesses for sponsorships and organized a small venue to display our art. I had never felt so alive, so empowered. The night of the show arrived, and as I stood there, surrounded by my paintings and the laughter of friends, I realized that I was no longer that scared girl who had been forced out of her home. I was a woman who had taken her life back, who had chosen to embrace her passions. The show was a success beyond my wildest dreams. People were moved by the stories behind each piece, and I could see the spark in their eyes as they connected with the emotions I poured onto the canvas. It was a night of celebration, not just for my art, but for my journey, for the resilience I had discovered within myself. As I reflected on how far I had come, my heart swelled with gratitude, but with the highs came the lows. I still had moments where doubt crept in, where I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. My dad's voice echoed in my mind, reminding me of the expectations he had for me, the path he wanted me to follow. I found myself grappling with the remnants of guilt and the need for validation from him. I knew I had to confront this lingering feeling, to finally let it go and fully embrace the life I was building. One evening, I decided to call my dad. The conversation was tense at first, filled with awkward pauses. I could sense his disapproval, even through the phone. "Why can't you just see things my way?" he asked, frustration lacing his voice. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his expectations pressing down on me. "Dad, I'm not that girl anymore. I'm happy doing what I love, and I need you to understand that." There was silence on the other end. My heart raced as I waited for him to respond. "I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to share your success with family," he finally said, his tone softening slightly. "I do want to share my success, but it needs to be on my terms, not yours." "I need to find my own way," I replied, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. That conversation was a turning point. It didn't resolve everything, but it gave me a sense of closure. I knew that I would always have to navigate the complexities of my relationship with my dad, but now I was armed with the knowledge that I had chosen my path and that I was worthy of my own happiness. As summer rolled into autumn, I felt a shift within me, a newfound sense of purpose and clarity. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, not just in my art, but in every aspect of my life. I had taken the first steps toward independence, and I was excited to see how it would all unfold. Looking back, I realized that getting kicked out of my home had been the catalyst for my transformation. I had taken that painful moment and turned it into something beautiful, something that would shape the rest of my life. I was no longer a victim of my circumstances. I was a creator of my destiny. As autumn painted the leaves in vibrant hues of red and gold, I found myself rediscovering the joy of my own company. I had always been the type to seek validation from others, particularly from my family, but that time in my life had forced me to rethink everything. It was liberating, really, to wake up each day in my own space, free from the weight of expectations. I embraced the solitude, turning my attention inward and letting my creativity flourish. I began to experiment with different art styles, blending my old techniques with new ideas that had been bubbling just beneath the surface. Every brushstroke felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity, my voice. In the evenings, I would often sit by my window, watching the world outside as the days grew shorter. The neighborhood was alive with the laughter of children playing and families gathering for dinner. I couldn't help but think about my own family and how different things had become. It hurt sometimes, that chasm between us, but I was learning to live with that pain. It was a reminder of how far I'd come and how important it was to stand up for myself. One chilly afternoon, while I was deep in thought, I received a phone call from a local gallery that I had submitted my work 2 months prior. My heart raced as I listened to the voice on the other end. They loved my pieces and wanted to feature them in an upcoming show. It was surreal, a validation that I desperately craved but had long thought I wouldn't receive. I could almost hear my dad's voice in my head telling me that I wasn't good enough, that I should have pursued something more practical. But that moment was mine. I was going to show them all. The day of the gallery opening arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I spent hours getting ready, choosing an outfit that felt like me. It was strange to think about how far I'd come from the girl who once thought she needed her dad's approval for everything. When I stepped into that gallery, I was met with a rush of excitement. The walls were adorned with my artwork, my visions, my stories, my struggles. It felt surreal to see them there, framed and lit up under the soft gallery lights. As people began to arrive, I stood by my pieces, nervously smiling at familiar faces and strangers alike. Some of my friends from college showed up, encouraging me and complimenting my work. Their support was overwhelming, and I felt a warmth spread through me. It was as if all the love I had craved from my family was being poured into me by my friends. I was surrounded by people who believed in me, and it felt incredible. Throughout the night, I engaged in conversations, sharing the stories behind my paintings. I poured my heart out about the journey I had taken to get there, how every splash of color represented a piece of my soul. I could see the interest and empathy in their eyes. It was validating in a way that I hadn't anticipated. I realized that my art had touched people, made them feel something, and that was more important than any approval I could have received from my dad. Toward the end of the evening, a woman approached me who worked for an art magazine. She had been captivated by my work and wanted to feature me in an article about emerging artists. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My heart soared. This was the kind of recognition I had only dreamed about, and it was happening right in front of me. As I stood there, basking in the glow of my success, I caught a glimpse of my phone buzzing in my pocket. I hesitated before looking at it. It was a text from my dad. I had half a mind to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. It read, "I saw your art show. I'm proud of you." A flood of emotions washed over me. Part of me wanted to respond with the fervor of my newfound independence, to tell him that I didn't need his approval, that I had carved my path without him. But another part of me yearned for connection, for reconciliation. I simply replied, "Thank you." After the event, I headed home, still buzzing from the thrill of the evening. The recognition was a turning point in my career, but more than that, it was a reaffirmation of my journey. I finally felt like I was stepping into my own skin. I was no longer that girl who sought approval from her father. I was an artist, and I was proud of what I had accomplished. In the days that followed, the excitement from the gallery opening began to settle, and I returned to my routine. I was still living alone, enjoying the freedom that came with it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The success felt hollow without the people I loved sharing it with me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my relationship with my dad still needed attention. I reflected on my feelings, weighing the pros and cons of reaching out to him again. Could I find a way to bridge the gap? I remembered how much I used to enjoy painting together when I was younger. Those moments were pure joy, and I realized that perhaps we could find common ground in art once more. After much deliberation, I decided to invite my dad over to see my latest work, the pieces that had been displayed at the gallery. It felt like a risk, but I was willing to take that leap. I wanted to show him who I had become, to share not just my art, but the person I was now. I hoped it might open the door to a different kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect and understanding. As I prepared for his visit, I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Would he truly see me for who I was now? Or would he still try to impose his expectations on me? I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the strength I had found. No matter what happened, I was ready to stand firm in my identity. The moment of truth was approaching, and I was eager to see where this journey would take us. When the day finally arrived, I had every corner of my small studio meticulously arranged. I wanted it to feel welcoming, but also reflect the growth I had achieved. The canvases were strategically placed, each telling a story, each a piece of my heart laid bare. I even brewed a pot of coffee, knowing how much he loved that dark, rich flavor. It was a small gesture, but I hoped it would set a warm tone for our reunion. As I waited, I felt a familiar knot of apprehension in my stomach. What if he didn't like my work? What if he dismissed it as a hobby? I tried to push those thoughts aside, reminding myself that this visit wasn't just about validation, it was about connection, about bridging the chasm that had grown between us. I glanced at the clock, feeling every second stretch longer than the last. When the doorbell finally rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I took a deep breath, smoothed my hair, and opened the door. There he stood, my dad, looking older but somehow unchanged. His eyes flickered over my face, then darted past me into the studio. "Hey, Dad," I greeted him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey there," he replied, stepping inside. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the canvases that adorned the wall. I could see a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but it quickly morphed into a guarded expression. "I've been working on these," I said, gesturing towards the painting. "I wanted to show you what I've been up to." He nodded, but didn't say anything. I felt the weight of the silence pressing down on us. I had thought that inviting him here would break the ice, but it felt as if we were standing on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. "Let me show you my favorite piece," I said, walking over to a large canvas that depicted a vibrant sunset over a quiet lake. The colors were bold and expressive, a reflection of my inner turmoil and peace. I painted this during a really intense time for me. It was about finding tranquility amidst chaos. My dad stepped closer, studying the painting. It's beautiful," he finally said, his voice softer than I expected. "Thanks," I replied, feeling a flicker of hope. "It means a lot to me." He continued to examine the piece, and for a moment, I dared to believe that maybe this was the turning point we needed. I tried to keep the conversation flowing, sharing stories about each painting, explaining my process and the emotions behind them. But as I spoke, I noticed that his responses were short and clipped. It was as if he was actively trying to suppress any deeper engagement. The more I talked, the more I realized that while I was opening up, he remained closed off. After a while, I decided to shift gears. "I know things have been rocky between us," I said carefully, "but I really want to understand where you're coming from. Why do you feel the way you do about my choices? It would help me to know." He turned to me, his expression suddenly intense. "I just want what's best for you. I've worked hard all my life to give you a better chance. It's not easy to watch you throw it away." His words felt like a punch to the gut. "I'm not throwing anything away, Dad. I'm pursuing my passion. This is what makes me happy." "Happy," he scoffed, the frustration evident in his tone. "You think happiness is going to pay the bills?" I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "Happiness is part of living, Dad. You can't just focus on making money and expect everything else to fall into place. I've learned that the hard way." He shook his head, disappointment etched across his features. "I just don't understand why you can't see it from my perspective. I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me," I echoed, my voice rising. "By kicking me out. By treating me like I'm a failure. That's not protection. That's punishment." The air between us crackled with tension, and for a moment, I feared we were slipping back into the old patterns of our relationship, the ones that had led us to this point. But then, something shifted. I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It was a small crack in his armor, and I needed to seize the moment. "Dad," I said gently, "I want to understand you, but you have to meet me halfway. Can we talk about this? Really talk?" He hesitated, the weight of his silence filling the room. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair as if he were trying to comb through his thoughts. "I don't know, maybe I've been too hard on you. I just worry." I nodded, my heart racing. "Worrying is okay, but we need to communicate. We can't keep having these conversations in anger. I want to share my life with you. I just need you to be open." He looked at me then, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of understanding pass between us. "Maybe I've been too rigid," he admitted, a hint of vulnerability creeping into his voice. "It's just, I don't want to see you struggle." "I appreciate that, Dad, but I need to make my own choices, even if they're not what you would choose." He seemed to ponder this, and the silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt different. I sensed the possibility of a new beginning. I didn't know where this conversation would lead, but I was ready to explore it with him. As the afternoon sun filtered into the studio, casting warm light over the canvases, I felt a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. This was only the beginning of our journey, but it was a step in the right direction, and for the first time in a long while, I believed we might just find our way back to each other. That moment lingered in the air, a fragile promise that perhaps we could navigate this complicated relationship together. I spent the next few days reflecting on our conversation, weighing my feelings, and contemplating the dynamics of my life. The world outside my studio was abuzz with life, yet I felt like I was living in a bubble, cocooned in my art and my thoughts. The following weekend, I decided to invite my parents over for dinner. It felt like a small but significant step toward rebuilding our relationship. I spent the day cooking, filling the house with the comforting aromas of roasted chicken, garlic, and rosemary. As I set the table, I could feel the knots in my stomach tightening. Would they show up? Would we be able to maintain the momentum we had built during our last conversation? When they finally arrived, my heart raced. Their faces were warm, and my mom's smile felt like a blanket draped over my shoulders. We settled down, and the initial awkwardness faded as we shared a meal. I noticed my dad still struggled to keep his guard up. He was polite, sure, but the tension in his posture was palpable. "Everything is delicious, sweetie," my mom said, her eyes twinkling as she served herself another helping. "You've really outdone yourself." "Thanks, Mom," I replied, trying to channel that moment of connection we had shared. "I'm glad you like it." We talked about mundane things, work, the weather, and upcoming family events. But I could feel the undercurrent of unsaid words, the weight of everything still hanging between us. I took a deep breath, determined to address the elephant in the room. "Dad, can we talk about what happened the other week? I know it was rough, but I think we need to address it if we want to move forward." His fork paused midair, and I could see the gears turning in his head. "I suppose we should," he replied slowly, his voice measured. "I know it's hard for you to understand my choices," I said, looking directly into his eyes. "But I really want you to see me for who I am, not just who you think I should be." He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I know I can be overbearing. It's just that I care so much, and I don't want to see you fail." "I get that, Dad," I said gently. "But sometimes failing is part of learning. I need you to trust that I can handle my own life, even if it doesn't look like what you envisioned." The conversation continued, and I felt something shift. We delved deeper into our past misunderstandings, and as we did, walls began to crumble. I spoke about my dreams as an artist, my struggles, and how his expectations weighed heavily on me. He opened up too, sharing his fears and the pressure he felt as a father. By the end of dinner, we found ourselves laughing at old family stories and reminiscing about simpler times. It was a relief to have those barriers lifted, even if just a little. But as the evening wound down, a nagging thought crept back in. I still had the house to deal with, and selling it weighed heavily on my mind. I hadn't yet decided how to tell them about my plans. In the days that followed, I spent more time at the studio, immersing myself in my art. It was a welcome distraction, a place where I could escape the complexities of family drama and focus on my own expression. The canvases began to fill up with vibrant colors and emotions, a reflection of my journey and the tumultuous feelings I was grappling with. Yet, no matter how much I tried to lose myself in my work, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the verge of a significant change. The house loomed in my mind like a ghost, haunting me with its memories and the financial burden it represented. One evening, as I stood in front of a half-finished piece, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in a space that felt like a weight on my shoulders. I needed a fresh start, a place where I could breathe freely, uninhibited by my past. I called a real estate agent the next day, ready to take the plunge. The process was surprisingly quick. I had prepared for this moment, and I knew how to present the house in the best light. Within a week, we had multiple offers, and I was overwhelmed by the interest. Part of me felt guilty, thinking of my dad's reaction when he found out, but the other part felt liberated. I received an offer that was higher than I had anticipated, and within days, I was signing the paperwork. It was surreal, watching the house that had been my childhood home slip away like sand through my fingers. I felt a bittersweet mixture of sadness and excitement. As I stood in the empty living room one last time, I closed my eyes, letting memories wash over me. The laughter, the arguments, the moments of joy and sorrow, they were all part of who I was. But I was ready to move forward, to carve a new path that was solely my own. A week later, I gathered my parents at the studio. I could sense the weight of the news I was about to drop on them. Their smiles turned to concern as I explained the sale of the house, and I saw the confusion flicker in my dad's eyes. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" he asked, his voice strained. "I needed to do this for me, Dad. I hope you can understand." As I watched their reactions, I felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. This was my life, my choice, and I was ready to stand firm in it. It's been a whirlwind since that day at the studio, a whirlwind that sent me tumbling through a range of emotions I didn't quite know how to handle. My parents had taken the news with a lot more grace than I expected, yet the silence that followed was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in my dad's mind, and my mom, ever the peacemaker, reached out to squeeze my hand as if to say she was still there, even if she didn't fully understand. I was embarking on a journey that felt both exhilarating and terrifying, and I wasn't sure if they were ready to see me take this leap. The next few weeks were a blur of packing up the remnants of my childhood, sifting through memories that had been tucked away in boxes and closets for years. Each item told a story, sparked a memory. I found my old dance shoes, cracked and worn, but they still held the remnants of countless recitals. I found the faded scrapbook filled with photos of my best friends, each page a testament to laughter and teenage adventures. And there, in the bottom of a box, was my diary from middle school, filled with hopes and dreams that seemed so trivial now, yet so monumental at the time. In the midst of all this nostalgia, I felt a peculiar sense of liberation. I realized that with each box I packed, I was not only letting go of physical items, but also shedding layers of expectation and obligation. I was carving out space for new experiences, new memories. It was as if I was cleaning out a closet that had become cluttered, not just with clothes, but with the weight of my past. I was making room for who I wanted to be, not who everyone else expected me to be. As I settled into my new apartment, I found comfort in the little things. The sound of my coffee maker brewing in the morning, the view of the city skyline from my window, and the warmth of my own space. I decorated with a mix of the old and new, my childhood photos intermingled with vibrant art pieces I had bought at local markets. This was my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe deeply and truly be myself without the shadows of the past looming over me. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The first month was filled with moments of doubt. I often found myself staring at the walls, questioning if I had made the right decision. Would I regret selling the house? Would my parents ever understand? Those questions haunted me in quiet moments, but they also pushed me to seek out new experiences and build a life that was uniquely mine. I threw myself into my work, pouring my energy into the projects that ignited my passion. I started collaborating with local artists, creating pieces that spoke to the heart of the community. I found joy in attending gallery openings, where I could connect with others who shared the same fire in their souls. Slowly but surely, I began to weave myself into the tapestry of this vibrant city, and with each new connection, I felt that old weight lift a little more. The breakthrough moment came unexpectedly. I was attending a community art fair when I met a group of women who were passionate about supporting emerging artists. They invited me to join their collective, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged. These women, each with their own stories of struggle and triumph, became my friends and mentors. They understood the journey I was on, having walked similar paths themselves. One night, as we gathered around a table filled with laughter and stories, I realized that I had created a new family, one that didn't replace my biological family, but rather complemented it. I could share my dreams, fears, and aspirations with them, and they would encourage me to keep pushing forward. It was a profound moment of clarity that solidified my belief that I had made the right choice. As the months rolled on, my parents began to visit me more frequently. They saw the changes in me, the spark in my eyes, and for the first time, I felt a sense of acceptance. They witnessed my growth, and with each visit, I could sense their worries easing. I took them to the art fair where I had first connected with my new friends, and as they walked through the stalls, I saw my dad's expression shift from concern to pride. "Your work is incredible," he said, wrapping me in a hug. "We're so proud of you." Those words were like a warm balm over my soul, healing the remnants of doubt that lingered. It was a reminder that it was okay to forge my own path, even if it led me away from the familiar. Now, as I sit here reflecting on the journey I've taken, I can't help but marvel at how far I've come. It's been a year since I sold the house, and I've filled my days with art, laughter, and love. My heart is lighter, and I feel free to express myself in ways I never thought possible. I've learned that home isn't just a physical space. It's the connections we nurture, the love we share, and the courage to pursue our passions, no matter where they lead us. As I wrap up this chapter of my life, I want to ask you something. Have you ever made a decision that felt incredibly daunting, but ultimately led you to a place of joy and fulfillment? What did you learn from that experience? Let me know below. Life is a constant journey of self-discovery, and I hope that my story inspires you to take that leap. Embrace change, seek out your own happiness, and remember that it's never too late to create a life that's uniquely your own. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.